everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Jenny. I'm starting off my April reading wrap-up, trying to get my head around what month it is. So I just finished The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, which I listened to on audio, and I've listened to both Station 11 and The Glass Hotel on audio. So I have a feeling when I read Sea of Tranquility, I will try to do it in hard copy because I just have never read her books physically before, which is interesting. So I enjoyed this novel very much, and I think that Emily St. John Mandel is a Marmite author. You either like the way she writes and dig it, you just like into it, or you're not gonna like it. It's not gonna float your boat. I find the way she tells a story to be so satisfying. She builds this web, and at the beginning, it's always very confusing because you're like trying to jump from character to character. You're not exactly sure. You want to get a grasp, especially when you're listening to things on audio. You want to get a grasp of what she's saying and who these characters are, but it's just a little bit, what's the word I want to say? It's a little bit just out of reach because you're trying to ground yourself in the story. And then when you get to a quarter of the way in and to half, and then near the end, you just have this immense payoff of this web of a story that's been laid out before you, and you're connecting all the little dots. So I loved that about this story. I loved all the Easter eggs about Station 11 that were in this story. It was so satisfying. The character who reappears, I'm not going to spoil or anything, but the character who reappears was very satisfying for me from Station 11. And she doesn't write good guys and bad guys. She writes complex people from their own perspective. And so you're always going into the character's head. You're understanding where they're coming from, their ambiguity, their conflict, their own self-talk. You're really hearing from the character's perspective, and you understand all those motivations, how they're being woven in, and you are left to agree or disagree with those characters as you see fit. She's not telling you how to feel about them. She's not telling you, oh, this is a good action, this is a bad action. She's just really, I really appreciate that about her storytelling, that level of trust in the reader to, go on the journey. I mean, if you'd have told me that I would have enjoyed a novel about a Ponzi scheme, I would have told you, no, I wouldn't. But what I also liked about it so much is how she moves through time, and you're moving in this time, like the 90s, the early 2000s, 2008. There's just these moments of different in the characters' lives, but you can also think about how those moments relate to your own life or your own history at those times. But you are learning something, but it's not... there's no kind of philosophical or like political jargon that's being thrown at you the way some other authors do that. And I don't mind that necessarily in a book. Oh, philosophical I usually do, but political or societal commentary, the way she works it in is so subtly connected to the characters in the moment that I just find it so effective. So I really enjoyed this novel. I listened to it quite quickly because I just got wrapped up, and I wanted to know. I just wanted to keep, figuring out what happens. She always gives her characters so much room to grow and change, which I really like too. And I just find it very satisfying. So yay for the Glass Hotel. There's a lot of beautiful metaphor as well, like even the title and people who live in glass houses, is relating to that. And I just, I really like the way she brings a perspective to her work. I just find it very satisfying. So enjoyed that one, and it's a good start off to April, and hopefully I enjoy my next finish as much as this one. Good morning, everyone. Having a very lazy weekend and getting a lot of reading done, which has felt really good. So I finished The Parisian by Isabella Hammad yesterday. So I wanted to chat through my feelings about that book. There are so many layers to this story, and I feel like it is one of those types of long books where you spend a considerable amount of time with a character, you watch them change and evolve and grow through all these different situations. And it's really hard to summarize that process and that journey that you've gone on with that person in the book. And so I really feel like The Parisian is like that. You're following Midhat Kamal. So you learn about his early years. He is from Palestine, but also lives in Cairo, and his father is a merchant at the turn of the 20th century. And when Midhat is of age, he travels to France to be a doctor, to learn medicine. And his father is very proud that he was able to send Midhat, and has, a lot of pride. But along with all of this general life character stuff, there's the political situation that is developing between the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, the British colonizing and creating what will be Israel. So it's a very complex and layered story that is woven. So Midhat's, as a character, is woven into the political and social evolution of this area of the world. And it's really not an area, it's not a history that I'm super familiar with, because it's very complex and there's so many layers and different countries, and with Syria as well, and Iraq, and just all of these things that mix together. And you're not really handheld through that history either. The end of the book actually has a detailed timeline that you can kind of read through, but ultimately you're more brought into these characters, their worldviews, and because other than Midhat, there's all these other characters that circle around him that he encounters on his trip, and when he's in France, that he encounters when he comes home. It wasn't the book that I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be about Midhat observing Western culture as an Arab Palestinian, but really that was not the case. He is his own character. He is very much tied into the romanticism of the French culture, the maybe elitist ideas that are tied into the Western culture that of a place where they were being colonized from. And then he goes home due to a kind of sort of a misunderstanding, but also a love affair gone wrong / kind of just, I guess, not feeling a part of the culture that he's in Paris. So he's in Montpellier in southern France, then he's in Paris, and then he's back in Nablus in Palestine. And so he goes through his life trying to seek his father's approval, which I think is probably a very typical Arab experience. But there's all these other characters around him, and you get wrapped up into this time period, which is, during World War I, And then you're not quite, I would say, up to World War II yet. So you're probably, I think the book is ending in the mid to late 1930s. And this is a time that was, there were uprisings, there was, the British were very much colonizing and trying to, there was a lot of Jewish immigration at this time because of all of the unrest in Germany, but also in different areas of Europe. So there's a lot going on. But you're just carried through on this journey with Midhat. And he's not a perfect character. He's very flawed. He's very clueless in a lot of ways, and kind of, I actually would, if you're familiar with tarot, and you're familiar with the journey of the Fool, I would kind of compare that. I don't know if that was a tie-in that Isabella Hammad was trying to do, but Midhat is kind of our fool on the journey, right? He's kind of naive, he's kind of self-absorbed, he's not really part of the political side of things. He doesn't really understand what's going on. So you're kind of in his shoes a little bit. You're kind of in his mind, but then you also are seeing things from different perspectives of different types of people who are having these experiences. And there's also not just an Arab perspective, but you're learning about the Christian, different missionary, like different nuns and priests who were involved in running hospitals and different things in the area. You're learning about the rebels. You don't really get much of a perspective of the colonizers, which I don't think you need, because I think it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. So it's a very complex and layered novel. I understand why it got the attention it did, because I think, certainly from my reading, I haven't read anything like it, and I think it really does offer a look on that area and on that perspective that was different for me, and something that I was interested in learning about. So overall, The Parisian, and that was one of my books for my 5-star predictions for 2023. I'm not going to tell you what I gave it, as I will reveal that in my 5-star predictions wrap-up video later this year. But I'm really happy to have gotten one of those big books, because it was over 500 pages, over 700 pages maybe, under my belt, and that only leaves me 2 more to finish in the coming months of this year. So I will be back later with when I finish another book. Good morning, everybody. Please ignore the laundry behind me. I finished Artemisia by Alexandra Lapierre and translated from the French by Liz Heron last night. I read this as part of the Thrive Together Network book club that I host, where we read a lot of predominantly books around female artists or art making or that type of thing. There's other examples in there, but we read a lot of books about female artists in that book club. So this is a novel, but I wouldn't say it reads like a novel. So at the beginning of the book, Alexandra Lapierre talks about how she came to write this book, how she did the research, what inspired her to write it this way. And it really is a lot about Artemisia's father, and I always forget his name, Orazio Gentileschi, because he was, a male painter in early 1600s Rome, and his career gave Artemisia the chance to have one at all, because a lot, of course, women at that time were not really trained to be painters, but he pushed her, his drive pushed her towards becoming a painter. And she was naturally talented. Out of all his children, she was the most talented, the one with the most promise to become a great painter. And painting at that time was very much a family trade. So it was looked at like a trade. So you trained in it with your parent or as an apprentice from the time you were a child, and you worked up your skills and you worked with them on big commissions. And so it was very much an industry at that time, and it was very, very competitive. So all of that is covered in this book. So you really get a good sense of what Rome was like, but not only Rome, you also are in Florence, you're in Naples, you're in London, and you get a strong sense of the history going on at the same time, the 30 Years' War, a whole bunch of different things that were happening during their lifetime. The book is called Artemisia, but really Orazio's lifespan from the time he has Artemisia is the span of the book. So it's not really Artemisia's perspective or Artemisia's lifespan. It's his in relation to her. And so Lapierre really ties them together as this driving force for each other. She basically says that once Orazio died, Artemisia's work became mediocre. Like, she never really made anything good again once he died because of his influence on her or something. I guess that's kind of debatable. That's maybe a subjective opinion. I'm not sure. Or maybe that's the general art history thought, that her work really, became mediocre as she aged. The life of a woman that is described in this book is pretty harrowing. Orazio was obsessed with keeping Artemisia pure and away from men, and then he trusted the wrong people, at which point she was raped and seduced by one of his closest confidants, at which point he was unable to marry her because he was already married. And so Artemisia and Orazio kind of created a plot to bring him down and to make him pay for what he did to her, because women's bodies were such property at that time. And so that was really actually quite hard for me to read. I found it difficult because the men were so misogynistic, so patriarchal in their look, in the way they looked at women, the way that a woman was either virginal or a whore. There was no in between. The way a woman was completely looked at as a piece of property and meat that would is there either to be ravaged sexually or used to whatever means the men deem appropriate. Like, just, it was overwhelming to me at times. I just found it, I don't even understand how women got through in this society. Basically they must have internalized a lot of that self-hatred and self-judgment because of the society they lived in. So it was very challenging. Artemisia's life was fascinating. She did things that other women didn't do. She was able to, through her cunning, through her strength, she was able to get through a lot of things that would, make a lot of women cower or give up. And so it's a really fascinating book. I think she did a good job. Just one more point about it. When I said it doesn't read like a novel, the nonfiction is very much woven in with fiction. And I think the reason she called it a novel was because she wanted to take license with some of the scenarios that we just don't know for sure. And also she wanted to take license in explaining the world in a more narrative form than nonfiction would give. But I wouldn't really say that this is a novel that sweeps you up into the characters, because you're given the characters' internalized thoughts, but I felt very removed from them for most of the time. Like, I never felt emotionally connected to them, or there was a bit of a remove there from the emotional connection you would usually look for in a novel. And I know that if you're a really skilled nonfiction writer, you can also, bring that out in nonfiction as well. You can really get invested. And I didn't really get there. There's one point in Artemisia's life where she experiences extreme loss, and I definitely felt sad for her, but I didn't feel like a real strong emotional connection. So that's why this book for me was a 4-star. It just didn't have that last little bit of, that magic kind of connection that I look for in a 5-star read. So that is Artemisia by Alexandra Lapierre, and I would recommend, if you're interested in art history, if you're interested in even in a feminist text where you're learning about the realities of women in different time periods, this one would be a good one to read. All right, I'll check in again when I finish another book. Hello. So I just wanted to wrap up this April wrap up with my 2 last finishes that I can talk to you about of April. So Sean the Book Maniac put out on his Friday Reads, he was talking about a group read hosted by Bernie Lombardi, who I had actually never heard of before, but he's a bookstagrammer, and he was reading a group read of The Stone Virgins by Yvonne Vera. So I looked at the book and I thought, wow, I think I have that book, and I do, and I believe I purchased it in 2019 in San Jose when I was there for a conference, and I purchased this book and a poetry book. So it's a short book, it's a novella, and I thought, well, I am reading a lot of nonfiction, it would be nice to read another fiction book, and I thought it's only a week long, so why don't I just join into this group read? So I did, and I read this book. So Yvonne Vera is an author from Zimbabwe, and this book is set in kind of 2 different time periods in pre-revolution Zimbabwe and then post-independence Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of political stuff going on. Obviously, before independence, Zimbabwe was called Rhodesia, and the way this book is structured, it is very unique. I have never really read a book like this before. It is pretty much all descriptive prose. Even the characters, you're kind of psychologically connected to them. You're in their bodies, and they describe their experiences very viscerally. So there's not a lot of thinking or dialogue in this book. It's more of a to me, it's their feelings. They're always emitting feelings and like sharing feelings and experiences. It's very poetically written. It's very lyrical. The descriptions are beautiful, even when they're describing things like war, because this is really a book about war, a book about displacement. It's a book about a place and the effect that war has on it. But it's very personal. It's not a wide-ranging look. It kind of gets very micro in its view of, these 2 sisters and this other, and a handful of a small amount of characters, very few, because it's all told in this very general perspective. It's very hard to describe, actually. There are some very violent things that happen in here. There are some very, very beautiful descriptions of nature. I'm glad that I read it. I think for me, this writing style is a bit too... It's very hard to grasp anything. For me, I felt like I was always floating in a dream-like trance when I was reading this book. So that's, I think if you read it in one sitting, that's kind of a nice experience to go through, and you might just get to the end and be like, whoa, what did I just experience? So I feel like it's kind of written with that in mind, to experience it in one sitting. Read it really fast. Read it in a readathon or something like that. To read it, and because for me, I had a hard time. I couldn't grab anybody. There were a few characters and I tried to hold on to them, but I just didn't really, they just were like sand in my hand. They just slipped through. So I don't think I would read more of her work because it's not really a style that I feel like I can sink my teeth into and like really get an emotional connection to. But I'm really glad I read it, and I think it was a really interesting experience to read a book like this. It's kind of it feels like a hybrid style of a book. It's not really a novella style that I've ever read before. So there's sort of like a poetry novella hybrid. That's how I would describe it, which is interesting because I would also describe Pistachios in My Pocket by Sareh Farmand as a hybridized book. And this is a poetry collection. Maybe this is already a category, memoir poetry. That's what I would call this, memoir poetry. Because you are taken on a journey through Sarah's experience here. You are, she and her parents left Heron in 1980, I believe, during the extremist takeover. And it is about leaving home. It is about the pain of leaving home. It is about displacement. It is about finding a new home, but then dealing with all the microaggressions and the feelings of inadequacy and feelings of not quite belonging, feelings of trying to adjust and wanting to belong, but just always being held like an outsider. All these wonderful themes in here of the extremist takeover of Iran, so what it was like before, which, and how there's all these perceptions about Iran based on popular media out of the United States. So just, it's so good. The poetry is really, really good. She tells poems in here from different perspectives of her family members, so it's kind of like she's using their experiences to tell their stories as well. So that's why it feels very much like a memoir. Like, I feel like even though this is not a novel, this is not a memoir, but it feels like that, and it's a poetry collection. So I think it's amazing to be able to do that, to be able to have someone read this and feel like I get a really good understanding of her experience, of her life up until this point. I think that's quite a feat, because poems are brief and they're fragmented, and they're not usually able to encompass so much of someone the way a memoir could, but this does. So I thought this was incredible. I would highly recommend. It's a small local press, At Bay Press, based out of, I think it's based out of here in Vancouver. I don't even know where At Bay Press is based out of, but please, if you like memoir, if you like poetry, if you like own voices stories of displacement, immigration, if you want to learn more about Tehran about Iran before it was taken over by extremists, please check this out. Okay, so that is what I read in the month of April, and I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.